I think what you're beginning to see are changes in the way that Al-Qaeda affiliated groups are trying to attack the UK, and certainly the reports that we've seen in the media recently have been about Mumbai-style attacks, essentially fedayeen tactics of individuals utilising automatic weapons and grenade devices to cause as much death and havoc as possible within a built-up urban space. And that kind of attack, certainly we've never seen it in the UK. There's a long history of it being used in Kashmir over the last 20 years or more, and also within mainland India and parts of Pakistan. But it's certainly not something that we've seen in the UK, and in that sense, you know, it's quite a grave development in that regard, and quite a concerning one. But that said, we do have a far greater capability now to pick these kinds of attacks up. So if indeed someone was planning these kinds of attacks, it would demand a great deal of on-the-ground reconnaissance to be conducted before the attack was taking place, which gives the services a lot of opportunities to interdict those individuals. Also, it requires a lot of military-style training, perhaps more than we'd seen in the past with previous attacks, whereby there was elementary training given in bomb making, but predominantly a lot of that training was given through the internet and electronic means. And a tiny element of training took place in the tribal regions of Waziristan. With fedayeen tactics, a more kind of hardened set of military principles need to be trained in order for those attacks to be highly effective. So there are opportunities, and again, as we've seen in the press, actually the most recent attack was foiled through predator attacks on training bases in Waziristan, foiling that particular attack. However, there are caveats to that in terms of the fact that the kinds of weapons that you use are not incredibly easy to come by, but they're also not incredibly difficult to come by, and a lot of our system has been built around detecting irregular amounts of fertilizer, let's say, being bought to construct these kinds of the bombs that were being used in the past. So there has to be attention paid to perhaps patterns of small arms proliferation a little bit more closely now, to make sure that we're picking up on these kinds of threats. The terror threat to the UK, as the government defines it, is currently banded as severe, and in terms of the kind of groups that they are facing at the moment, one of them is obviously Al-Qaeda and its affiliated groups. And also the other form of terrorism that we're facing are dissident Irish Republican groups, which we've of course seen a resurgence in recent months. There's a careful balance that governments have to make between making the population aware of the severity of the threat that they're facing, but also not scaring them into not going about their everyday lives. At the core of terrorist ideology is trying to interrupt your everyday patterns of life and the way that you go about your existence. So it's important that governments, when they have a threat of an attack, such as the kinds of foiled attacks we've seen recently, they don't raise levels to such a critical level unless there's real need to be that aware, if you like, of potential bombs going off around you. And the times that the threat level has been raised to its most extreme points have usually been in the wake of actual attacks. So in the wake of the 7/7 2005 attacks in London, obviously we raised the threat level to its highest degree at that juncture, and for obvious reasons, people had to be absolutely aware of what was going on around them because of the number of potential terrorist attacks that were taking place. However, in terms of what we've just seen in these attacks that have been disrupted, or potential attacks that have been disrupted around Europe, I think it's important that a balance is struck and that the threat level is kept at the same level. However, I mean, if the frequency and intensity of this kind of attack planning raises over the next weeks and months, well, then it's logical that you should make people more aware that they need to be more aware of their surroundings, and that terrorism might be around. But at the moment, I think it's actually the sensible approach is to be calm, measured, and appreciative of the fact that we have actually hindered these attacks. Currently, we're undergoing a strategic defence and security review, and I think recently perhaps the security side of the review has been lost a little bit, and for obvious reasons, because the kind of restructuring of our military capabilities are the primary focus, for good reason, because of our engagements in Afghanistan and abroad. But in terms of how we deal with the terrorist threat, and especially in light of the attacks that were broken up in the recent days, it's important to remember actually that our intelligence networks have gone through a huge growth spurt over the last 5 to 10 years. MI5 itself, in terms of personnel, has doubled in size. In terms of the regionalisation of its hubs, it now has a number of hubs across the country, which it never had before. It was more London-centric. So there has been already an expansion of our intelligence services. So I think it's not so much a case of increasing the spending allocation to our intelligence networks, even though intelligence is really the key to combating terrorism. The more information you have on groups, what they're doing, and suspicious individuals, the better for actually disrupting and countering, attacks. But it's more a matter of maintaining the kind of levels that we have in intelligence rather than allocating enormous additional funds to it. So I think that will be the game. Will they be part of the salami slicing that goes on within this review? I would envisage them being left alone. They've been through an expansion. They've been very successful as a consequence of that expansion. But in terms of their further expansion, I don't think that will occur. I think in terms of the way that we combat terrorism through the SDSR, there's definitely been a line in government of linking operations in Afghanistan to the terrorist threat in the UK.